Okay, so I'd like to welcome everybody to Legislative Policy Committee of the League. Today, it's December 13, and hope everybody is staying warm in this weather. It's going to get worse before it gets better, I hear. So let's get started today. And the first thing I saw John Park in the back. So John, do you want to come up and talk to us about public safety? All right, well, I could fill in for you for a minute if you want me to. But.
We need to adopt the minutes.
Oh. Okay, we need a motion to adopt the minutes first, I guess.
So moved.
There's them, so moved.
Okay, I see it. Is there a second? Second. Okay, all in favor of adopting them? Thank you, Mayor. All in favor of adopting the minutes, say aye. Aye. Okay, anybody opposed? They're adopted. Thanks. Okay, John.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to see you. Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. Looking forward to the holidays and maybe not listening to LPC and things like that for a while. But we so appreciate you being here. I want you to know that I'm looking forward to the Rose Bowl. Sorry, you BYU fans. Anyway, moving right along. Today there's a couple bills we'd like to talk about. We really want discussion on these bills. We really want probably long-term impact on long-term discussion. At the end of the day, on at least one of the bills, I'm going to ask people to get a hold of me to create some kind of task force that we can get input and maybe come up with some ideas with some of these. So at least Representative Gwynn's bill. First of all, I'd like to quickly go over Representative Birkeland's bill that concerns public safety and also concerns our educators. One of the themes, it seems like this year in the legislature is going to be to shorten the cooling off period after you retire. I don't know if you're aware of how that works, but right now, if I retire in any field, whether it's police, fire, or just administration, that I can't go back to work immediately for another city or anybody else on the URS system until 1 year. I can do some things, but I think the limit is I can't make more than $15,000 or a certain percentage of what I made, whichever is the least. And so that one of the things that Representative Birkeland is concerned about is that there's a belief that if I'm a police officer or if I'm an educator and I can retire and only have to set out for 60 days rather than a year, and her bills, I'm sorry, it's not on this thing, but her bills allows you to go back to work at another URS city or county as long as it is a rural city or county. It excludes the entire Wasatch Front, Washington County, and Cache County. And so her bill is that hopefully to help teachers take a retirement and then set out 60 days, which would be the summer, right? And then go back to work in those smaller jurisdictions because they are having such a tremendous inability to get people in the jurisdictions. I think that everybody I've talked to is everybody that I've talked to in doing this up on the Hill says that Birkeland is just really aiming at educators because she's that's something she champions, but it does have a impact on public safety, and whether that's just thrown in to make it look better for a lot of people or not, I don't know. The cost, the fiscal impact of that is working with URS. We're not finalized on this yet, but it's about $9 million that of course we're going to have to help pay for. So, if not pay for. That bill, we'll see. We don't want to take action on that because we think that it's still, by the time it actually gets it to its final to the end here when it'll change. And so I think that's something that, any questions on that, any discussion on that? I think the discussion I want to have is probably on the next bill anyway, but any questions? Yes, Jimmy.
Come with a mic for you.
Yeah, thanks for using the microphone. People that are remote can hear. We can hear you anyway. Hi, Jimmy.
Excuse me, I think one of the concerns is it potentially exasperates an already difficult recruiting challenge within the Wasatch Front when we encourage, officers to leave organizations and jurisdictions that they're working for, even if they go to rural areas of the state. So it is essentially not a solution, but a transfer of a problem from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction.
Our inability, as far as I can tell, we're about 10% down. Does that sound about right in all your departments of police officers? And, and maybe we're just transferring the problem from one side to the other. I think the problem is pretty ubiquitous. And so I think that's spot on, Jamie. I appreciate that. The other bill I want to talk about is Representative Gwynn, and I want you to know that we just left Representative Gwynn, and quite frankly, he was a little frustrated that we had to come to this meeting because he wanted to continue to talk and work things out. Representative Gwynn is a friend, of course, of the League of Cities and Towns. He's a police chief in beautiful Roy, Utah, and he met with us today and is more than willing to discuss this. His bill, again, deals with the cooling off period. This goes from a year to 60 days. And it also reduces the service tenure in Tier 2 public police officers from 25 years to 20 years. It increases the multiplier for retirement contribution, and we'll get that. And it also backfills the Tier 2 retirement, because if we're taking 25-year retirement and suddenly changing it to 20-year retirement, it's a problem, right? I mean, there's a lot of money that's so therefore the impact on this right now as it sits is a lot. It's $41 million. $9 million of that is from would increase our public safety contributions. But the bad thing is, we talked to you as it sits today, and Representative McGuinn recognizes this and is going to help us look for solutions. He says on this is the 32 of that $41 million actually directly affects our Tier 2 employees, because the way the law reads right now, or the way that it's funded, their contribution would increase, that out of their paycheck would increase by 11.15%, or increase 11.15%. Therefore, it would really have the opposite, as it says right now, it'll have the opposite effect on Tier 2 employees, and that they would actually take home less money. Now, there's if this passed today, I think we have options within our cities in that we would have to increase to cover that. I mean, the way it reads, they would cover it, but obviously we would have the option to be able to cover that for them. The other thing that he suggested is that he would seek ways to buy down essentially that $32 million shortfall, and through one-time money from the state. And I don't. Hopefully, if this passes, that's something we can talk about, and we appreciate happening. It also one of the concerns that we have that doesn't seem to be a concern a lot of other places is that the funded ratio in Tier 2 would go from 87% to 55% essentially in the state retirement system. So let me tell you a little bit of what we talked about today with Representative Gwynn. He has gone back, and there's a data that we're reviewing that he's provided for us that basically starts out by saying the Tier 2 decision back 10 years ago was made on flawed data. And what he is suggesting, and what it seems to show in the data, is that the numbers they talked about was the average life of the average retirement service years of retirement for public safety, police and fire folks was 24 years. And in reality, he thinks that was misleading, and there's no, I don't think we can argue with that, if that is correct, that yes, that was the average, but if you take fire was closer to 27, and police was closer to 20. And we also had a good discussion concerning mental health, that oftentimes that trying to increase the pool of people that want to come into law enforcement and want to stay in law enforcement oftentimes is related to the mental health of the officer, and just burnout basically. And I think that we've come a long way, I think, in the last couple of years in recognizing that as an issue and trying to figure that out. We also talked about the number of police officers that have fallen out of the URS system in the last 10 years. And we don't know if that is just because it's a bad job. We don't know what the cause of that, and we're going to do some additional research onto that and try to compare with the numbers he got from URS of the number of police officers that have fallen out, in other words, quit, out of the URS system in the last 10 years, and compare that to just general employees in the state system that have fallen out, whether that is related to unemployment, whether that is related to the way younger people seem to jump from job to job to job to job, those kind of things. And, or just simply is our problem, we have a high employment rate, we have a low unemployment rate. I think if you drive down this road out here, every fast food service, every store you go by is help wanted ad, right? That's a problem. And so that's where we are. We want some discussion on that. We want to try to understand what your thinking is. And then what I would like to do is have some of you reach out to me. We're meeting again with Representative Gwynn on the 29th. And we would love to have a little work group that might meet 1 or 2 times via Zoom on that issue, or even live on that issue, and get some input and review some of the data that we're getting, and try to move this discussion along. Comments, please. We want your comments. Yes.
So, John.
Go ahead, Jeff. I wasn't calling on you, but you're the vice president, and
So my question really is, I'm trying to just bring back into my head the Y2 survey that we did of public safety officers, police officers, with respect to their incentives on Tier 1, Tier 2 retirement. And I think the service tenure reduction is probably calculated to make the Tier 2 more attractive to people, bring it more in line with what they can do under Tier 1. But that seems like it's another can of worms there if we have officers retiring in 20 years and, labor shortages as a result of that. And how does that coincide, or how does that mesh with the survey? Is that clear?
That's a great question. No, that's not clear, Jeff. No, just kidding. No, that's very clear. As you recall, we did a survey. In fact, it was sponsored, and we did this with Representative Gwynn. And the survey showed the main reason that people want to leave public safety is not the retirement system. It is, number 1, is wages, and number 2 is support of elected officials. That's part of the reason. I know probably hardly any of you were in our EOE our first EOE last Saturday. We touched just specifically on public safety because we wanted them to understand these issues. And what we're trying to, what I think this bill does is not address that, quite frankly. Those 2 things. The third one was retirement. And again, thinking that a better retirement system will have more people come into the bottom of the pool because they now understand that they understand the retirement system. There's also an issue that he brought up that I didn't quite understand, that I will do more research into. If anybody is understand taxes better than I do, but the scenario that he pointed out with a 20-year or even a 25-year retirement that is based largely on 401k, which is an election they have to make immediately upon hiring which part of it they want to go in. And if they accept the 401k option in the Tier 2 retirement, and say they're 25 years old, and they work, let's say they're 21 years old, and they work for 25 years, and they retire, which puts them at 46, that they cannot get any of that 401k money until they turn 50, but only if they turn 50 and they are still a public safety officer. I know that my 401k, I wasn't be able to access that until 59 and a half, but until I was 59 and a half years old, which, will occur in 8 or 10 years for me. And anyway, that was a new concept to me. And so what he's saying is effectively, if you start at a very young age to become with a 25-year retirement, it's not a 25-year retirement. In many cases, it becomes a 29-year retirement because you cannot access those funds. And if you drop out of public safety for a certain amount of time and go into another profession, that in reality, then you still can't claim that at 50, even though you could if you stayed a public safety officer. Anybody lend any insight to that? Yeah.
I can as far as public safety, but I know we're a military family. It's very similar where we don't have the early election, but it's very similar. Like most people have to have a second career after the military because my wife just hit 20 years. She's 42 and she can't access any of her retirement benefits until she's 60.
Okay.
So a lot of people are forced to do a second career. In this case, I guess there's an incentive for them to stay in public safety till 50. But it's not unique, I think, to this, where you have these shorter retirement eligibility periods. Out in the private sector, you just work till you're 60 or 65, right?
Yeah, great. Okay. There was a comment back here that, yes, ma'am.
Tawny Barker from West Jordan. I guess my comments just kind of fall in line a little bit with what you already said. You guys did the Y2K study. We did our own internal studies as we were talking to our officers, and salary definitely came out on top. So this past year, we increased police compensation $1.1 million. This next year, that same increase will cost us $1.5 million, and that's without merit steps, and that's without a possible 5% COLA increase that we're looking at in this coming year. So we feel like we've addressed a lot of the concerns that were occurring around recruitment because it's the younger officers that typically look to salary first and the older officers that typically look to retirement. When we look at those, tier 1 officers that we have that are getting close to retirement, we don't have as much of a problem retaining them. If they leave, it's to be a police officer in another city that could pay them more, which is hence the large increases this last year, right? Salt Lake City. So that's what we're competing with, and we really feel like we've hit that on the head. So I just question really how much this bill is going to have any impact on recruitment or retaining good officers. It might have a small impact, but certainly not the impact that we're looking for. Chief Valentine and I have had great conversations about this. His job is to get the best possible deal for his guys, right? And he obviously loves this. He told me he's quote unquote eagerly supporting it, right? But for the city, we have to look out for the widow's mite and the taxpayer dollars. And something like this, for our city, if there was just a 10%, we were looking at it from a very conservative standpoint of 10%. And just with our tier 2 sworn officers, that would cost us an additional $150,000 this next year. So this has a huge price tag for a city like ours. And I'm just not sure how we could support it. I just don't see the connection between the cost and really solidly making an impact on So I guess somebody tell me what that impact is, because
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it, at least not for the price tag we're looking at.
Molly? Not from Libertas.
I have no answers, but I do have another question with that. So, Tawny, to your point, we did send out a survey both to UCMA and to LPC trying to gather that data so that we can understand what is going on within your public safety workforce so we can have these conversations. So we did send out a survey. I think we've had about 20 cities or even 20 people respond. Some of those were duplicates within a city. So we sent out a survey asking, did you raise public safety salary above a cost of living adjustment? And then additionally, with this, are you contributing extra to your tier 2 employees to bring them to parity with contributions of tier 1? So if you haven't filled out that survey yet, it would really help us if you do, so that we can try to arrive at some answers to these questions and figure out how to best move forward in addressing this labor shortage.
Great. Carson?
All right, John, we've got a few questions from folks online. So first, this actually is a question about the Birkeland bill. Which counties does that apply to again? Could you just repeat that part?
Yeah, once you retire, you could have a 60-day cooling off period. If you went to work in a municipality or a county, another URS entity, in every county except for Washington, Utah, Salt Lake, Davis, Weber, and Cache.
Awesome. Thank you, John. And then question number 2 is from Councilmember Egbert. Is Representative Gwynn open to splitting the provisions in the bill and addressing the cooling off period and the tier 2 changes separately? Because they're two big issues.
They are, and interesting, and that's a great question, Councilmember Jessica Egbert from Mapleton, yeah. Originally, Gwynn's bill just addressed, when it's first adopted as a committee bill, it just had the 60-day cooling off period essentially, and then he came back and changed a requirement that if you retired at 20 years earlier than 60, you did not have the reduced benefit. And then he went back and changed it to the tier 2. And he's looking at this as kind of an all-encompassing retirement bill, even though we understand that he agrees that this is multifaceted and the retirement is just a little piece of what addresses that. So he's looking at the whole thing together.
Okay.
To address his.
And I've got 3 more for you. Next, Councilman Ivy said the core issue that we are facing is attracting younger workers to a career in law enforcement. What can we do to rectify that problem? And he also added that inflation may be driving preferences towards wages versus retirement.
That's more of a statement. That's more of a correct statement, I think, than it is a question. I think one of the big questions we have to ask ourselves with Representative Gwynn's bill is if the change of retirement, is it going to attract young people into the profession? And I think that to me is the overarching question. If it does, then it may be worth the amount of money. If it doesn't, I don't know. And I don't think we have any data on that. I do know that for the most part, a lot of the millennials I've just talked to, they would rather have more money and kind of worry about their retirement on their own, and that may or may not be able to attract that pool. The thinking is, of course, from Representative Gwynn, that yes, in fact, it would affect that pool in the bottom end.
Thanks, John. The next question from Matt Dixon. Are there any discussions about doing something similar for non-public safety officers with regards to Tier 2? Cities are having a really hard time finding and recruiting any kind of public employee, engineers, inspectors, public works, et cetera. So he asked if there's room to open this up beyond public safety.
Again, great question. And it's good to hear from you, Matt. Matt did a great job at our EOE last Saturday. The answer is no. I have not heard of anything. Has anybody else? That may be a question for. I kind of live in the public safety realm. when it comes to legislative issues, but I have not heard of anything else to affect, other than Berkland's bill, that affects anybody but public safety officers.
Gotcha. And then this one, the last one's just a comment from Eric Kafusi. Based on my
Wait, let me add one more thing
yeah.
to Matt Dixon's question, is I think the kind of the core to that question, how that question relates to public safety, is how much of our inability to recruit and retrain is actually connected to our 2.2% unemployment rate.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So let's see. The last comment, based on my understanding, I think it's a non-issue if the employee elects the pension option as opposed to 401k, and we guess very few employees would choose the 401k option instead of the pension, but it would be interesting to see the data on that. So maybe that's something we could kind of look into more.
Yeah, and one of the problems that he pointed out with that is if you're a young person, you get hired and you elect the 401k option, there's no way to change it after your first year of employment. And you may get older and wiser, and there's no way to change that. And so maybe something that's addressed as well in URS rules.
And perhaps this is more of a statement and less of a question, but that last bullet point, effectively dropping the funded ratio to about 55%. This has been done in other states. It's never worked out well. I guess my question to Representative Gwynn is, why are we going down a path that's been proven over and over again to lead to disaster when we underfund these retirement funds?
Yeah,
We always say it'll fix itself in the future, but it never does. It always becomes a huge problem.
Yeah, that's a great point. And interesting enough, on one hand, that didn't seem to come, that really didn't come up in our meeting. I mean, we showed the data to him. We talked about the data, but we never really discussed that. A little surprised that there was no concern about it, but we never really pushed that issue either when we talked to them. But it's interesting that to me is very interesting because the entire Tier 2 discussion came from the recession of 2008, 2009, when we saw retirement funds across pension plans across the nation going bankrupt, like in Illinois, places like that. And and perhaps Tier 2 at that point was an overreaction because we don't do things like they do back there, to start with. And so that kind of discussion and understanding kind of the history of Tier 1 and Tier 2 really lends itself to talk about that question. Mr. Davidson. Wait a minute, microphone.
Just speaking to that point, back when we experienced the Great Recession, the URS lost $5 billion with a B.
Yeah.
So the framework of that compromise back in 2011 was based on a financial market that's dramatically different than today. And one of the concerns is if we go and modify the plans at a time now when we're in a healthy, vibrant, growing economy, and then the economy turns, are we going to essentially be involved in a do-it-yourself mugging?
Yeah.
Where we're actually doing it to ourselves.
Wait a minute, I'm visualizing stuff here. Yeah. I mean, great comment. Thank you. Okay, with that, anything else, Carson, on the, okay, we're good? I'm going to ask that very thing this very second. I would like to get, I need some people to bounce things off of, and I'd like to have, why don't you just, we need 4 to 6, I want to put a little subcommittee together, 4 to 6 people, including city managers, elected officials, people like that. Why don't you just, if you wouldn't mind just reaching out to me, and if you're interested, either come over and see me, drop your card off, send me an email, send me a text. Those of you that, all my information is, if you don't have it, is on the league website. It's just john@johnwpark.com. And I'd love to put that together. If I don't get people I need, I'll just reach out to many of you, but it's something that we need to work on. And I know how fun it is to work on issues like this over the holidays. Okay? Cameron, do you have anything you want to add to this? You're up next anyway, I think.
Yeah, I'll add one thing. The last thing I'll add is this. First, it's great to see so many of you today, and between online and in person, we have about 160 people here, so that's terrific. The one thing I'll add is this. A couple of years ago, there was legislation in the public safety retirement space at the Capitol. We initially opposed it, and the league got blown up on the Senate floor. So, yeah, John Hiskey and Mark Johnson on their heads. You remember how ugly that got. And thankfully, the league and the Chiefs of Police Association have a very strong working relationship. And the Chiefs of Police Association worked closely along with league representatives to get that bill to a place that we could live with. So one of our objectives is try to avoid that sort of political bloodbath on the Senate floor. But we also need to make sure that we are providing data, and Representative Gwynn, to his credit this morning, in the 2 hours that Molly, John, and I met with him, kept emphasizing, these are the questions I'm trying to answer. I'm looking for this type of data from local governments. I'm looking for this data from URS. And I think he's a data-driven individual, and we need to have that holistic conversation with him over these next few weeks. So the volunteers will help. We're meeting with him again in a couple of weeks, and then anticipate us bringing this back to LPC in the between now and the first week of March.
And kind of, I think what we're going to want from this task force is, number one, just to kind of brainstorm ideas and other ways to affect the retirements. I mean, the occupational issue associated with public safety, but also to talk about what kind of data that we need to be able to tell the appropriate story, and how our decisions and his decisions ought to be made off that data. Thank you all.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Reach out to John either today or electronically, and so we can get that group put together. John mentioned his contact info. Even if you reach out to any staff member, we'll get it to John and get the right people in the room. UCMA and the league and league staff had a great discussion on this topic earlier this fall, and so UCMA, I'll be looking to your leadership team as well to make sure we've got the right people there. Okay. Before I jump into the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, let me say Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everybody. Normally I'd be wearing a Christmas tie, but this feels like Christmas. Go Utes. But the best thing about this December for BYU fans is, even though your bowl pairing is lousy, BYU is arguably the best team in the West, since you beat both the Mountain West champs and the Pac-12 champs. So you can take that as a win. Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. So I'll be thinking of you while I'm in Pasadena on New Year's Day. Okay, consolation prize, right? Okay, so Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, hot off the presses. There's a protected copy. This is the first official draft of the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission Retail Incentives Bill. I printed this about 2 hours ago now, as I was leaving for the Capitol to meet with Representative Gwynn. So here's the objective over the next few minutes on this piece. I'm going to quickly outline where things are at, and then the league board is going to be spending considerable time on Wednesday deliberating on this bill. So our request to you as LPC members is, if there are any other issues you want to make sure that the board considers as part of their deliberation on this bill, we need to know by tomorrow morning at the absolute latest. So either you can raise your hand now, or you can grab us or email us, or whatever the case may be, because Mayor Ramsey, go ahead and raise your hand. Yep, League President Mayor Ramsey has to cast a vote on this bill on January 11th, because this bill will be going to the full Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, and so she'll be casting a vote on behalf of the league. Likewise, in 23 minutes, the Commission on Housing Affordability is going to be meeting to consider draft legislation. Much of that draft legislation we anticipate will be the SB 34 concept that we have brought before LPC in the past couple of meetings. There is no draft bill yet. Okay? So they're going to be talking about the concepts of SB 34 in that meeting to bring back for their consideration on January 7th. The reason I bring those two dates up is we do not have an LPC scheduled between now and either of those two dates. So for Mayor Ramsey's purposes on the UEOC, and for the two league reps on the Commission on Housing Affordability, today's really our last checkpoint with LPC to get feedback, and then the league board on Wednesday will be considering both, and I'm hoping we'll have a CHA draft. But at the very least, we have a retail incentives draft. Okay. Much of this isn't new. It's been tweaked a little bit since we last met in November. League staff has been meeting weekly with the co-chair of the Sustainable Communities subgroup of the UEOC. We've been meeting weekly since August, deliberating over the potential retail incentives language. So again, you can see really the biggest sticking point, and one of the sticking point that we've heard from cities all over the state has been, what is the definition of retail? Is it anything that collects and remits sales tax, or are we really talking about big box or equivalent? And so you can see that's still a sticking point, and even within this version, it's still starting from the framework that cities cannot provide retail incentives to anything that collects or remits a sales tax unless you meet one of the exceptions. Definition of incentive is tied to tax revenue. Definition of infrastructure initially started very broadly. This version of the bill now defines infrastructure as following the Impact Fees Act and distinguishing between project infrastructure or project improvements and system improvements. So under the current version here, system improvements are still acceptable for retail incentives. Project improvements would not be. There's still other exceptions at play even to that exception. Okay, so that I'll come back to in a second. The mixed use with housing, that is still in this bill. Let me double check to make sure it's still consistent with the slide I put together last night. Yep, it is. Okay. The concept here is cities could have really unlimited use of retail incentives for mixed use developments that meet a certain housing threshold. We've received feedback from countless cities at this point about different types of mixed use projects that are underway in your communities, some that would meet a 50% threshold, some that wouldn't, and the ones that wouldn't, it's usually due to market forces at play or other unique circumstances. So Representative Schultz has said repeatedly he's open to modifications therein. The current version still has that 50% piece. And then, let me just hit the exceptions and then.
So is there, you may have to repeat my question, but is there still an affordability?
It's okay, Liam, I'll do it. Is there still an affordability piece?
On the 50%?
Yeah, yep. So as of last night when I was putting the slides together based on the draft from Thursday, let me just double check. Yeah, so it still has that 50% moderate income housing piece in conjunction with your moderate income housing plan. And this is where it does get really tricky. We actually proposed a sliding scale concept that was initially rejected, where depending on where you are in your life cycle of a city, you would have different standards, or what the property looked like, you'd have different standards. But as of now, it's still just the 50%. Though, again, as of Thursday, the 50%, yeah, so it's still using the term 50% of the developable area within the development is dedicated to new or proposed housing units, and at least 50% of those new or proposed housing units qualify as moderate income housing. So that's how it's worded now. Up until this draft arrived this morning, there had been a lot of internal drafts that have been circulating. This is the first time Ledge Research has put pen to paper, okay? So the last piece on the exceptions piece, you can see that list of exceptions continues to grow. Essentially, this is how the deliberations have gone over the last few months. So Orem City or West Jordan City or Layton City or Bountiful or Riverton, pick a city, would email us and say, have you thought about X? In Midvale's case, have you thought about how this impacts Superfund sites that need to be redeveloped like Jordan Bluffs? Or in Taylorsville's case, have you considered how this impacts a redevelopment like Carriage Square, and so on and so forth? We and then would go into the negotiations and talk through certain examples. So in last week's meeting, Justin and I came in, and one of the new pieces in that meeting dealt with warehouses. West Valley City had brought that issue to us, so we brought that issue back into the conversation. And more or less what has happened is each time we bring up one of the examples about why this approach is problematic of the broadband with exceptions, and we say, well, what about this exception? What about this approach? What about these unique conditions? The response would be, okay, we could live with that. Let's draft an exception that addresses it. That's not the case for all of them, but in the majority of cases, the examples we bring up turned into potential exceptions, okay? So here's where we're at. The board is meeting in 2 days. The way the meeting ended last week is Representative Schultz said to Justin and me that he was open to scaling back the bill if the league brought forward something that would move the needle more on housing and housing supply. We referenced then that we'd been working on SB 34 plus. He didn't have a copy of SB 34 plus, but he said he wanted to see more of that, so we're meeting with his staff later this week to talk through SB 34 plus in more detail. He was open to a few more exceptions, but was also concerned that the bill could have too many exceptions. What we'll be trying to figure out in the next 36 hours before the league board meeting on Wednesday, 36 hours, that's not quite right, 48 hours, we're not meeting at midnight. In the next 48 hours before the league board meeting is what is the practical consequences of the language that's currently in this draft bill? It is a protected copy. We asked for permission to share it. We were given permission to share it with the league board. If any of your cities want to follow up with specific concerns or anything else, let us know and we can talk through it. But right now, we don't have permission to share it beyond just the league board of directors. And then, as I mentioned, Mayor Ramsey, time is ticking because Mayor Ramsey will have to cast a vote on whatever the draft looks like come January 11th. Okay, let me stop there and just see if there are, well, not if, see what questions there are in the retail incentive space, or just comments that you want to make sure league board members like Mayor Silvestrini, Mayor Ramsey, Councilmember McKay, I swear I saw Mayor Shepherd, I know Councilmember Egbert is on the call. I'm scanning the room, but I don't have my glasses. Councilmember Bradshaw. And then there are, I'm sure, plenty more online, and then several of you staffers in the room have electeds on the board. So any comments or questions, Mayor Ramsey?
I just have a question. In the 50% affordable housing requirement that you said did show up in the bill, so I haven't even seen the bill yet. It literally came out this morning. Thank you.
Well, okay. I have not seen the bill yet. I'm dying. And as soon as Cameron sits down, I'm going to grab it from him and look through it because it just came out. But one of the questions that I have is in the 50% affordable housing, does it still give the municipalities the opportunity to determine the zone so that it can be a wide enough zone that 50% threshold is actually accomplishable or not? That's been a conversation piece, but I don't know if it ended up in there. But that's, otherwise, if it's a small project area, in some cases that 50% is going to be maybe hard to reach, although it's come down from, it's been proposed at all sorts of levels. And so I'm just wondering what that looks like.
Perfect. Let me give context to her question because she's referencing a conversation she and I had last week. So when Justin and I finished our negotiations last week, called Mayor Ramsey to update her on the dialogue, and at the time there was a healthy back and forth over whether the 50% housing component would apply just to a standalone development, whether it would apply to a project area, whether the city would define that, or whether it would be defined in statute. And it was still somewhat up in the air. So the language that I have in my hand here is 50% of the developable area within the development is dedicated to it. So that is tighter than what you and I were discussing last week. Okay, so let's go Carson, and then Mayor-elect, and then I thought I saw a hand over there too.
Let's see if I can turn the mic on. First question from Paul Larson. Could an industry definition of big box be included? For example, the ICSC or Retail Confederation, their definition of big box?
Thank you, Paul. So current law already defines big boxes as regional retail facilities. And I'm doing it off the top of my head now, but I believe it was 80,000 square feet for a general retailer, 30,000 square feet for grocery stores, and then auto dealers, or a shopping center that 150,000 square feet. So that's already defined in state law as a regional retail facility, and cities, going back to 2004, are already prohibited from doing direct sales tax incentives to anything in that category. So we had actually just been looking at that definition, because it's already in state law, and saying if the legislative problem we're trying to solve is the city versus city competition, then let's just use that definition and create a better framework around that definition. So right now, Paul, they've deleted that language that's in code. I'm looking at you, Carson, like as if you're Paul. But But the proposal deletes that language and then just distinguishes between retail that collects and remits sales tax and retail that doesn't.
Second question from David Johnson. Can you discuss the exceptions for rural communities and the population thresholds?
Yeah, thank you, David. Thanks for hosting us in Blanding, by the way. This past Saturday, we met over 170 newly elected mayors and council members statewide. So Carson was in Blanding meeting with them, and we partnered with Utah State University to broadcast statewide, and we had staff all over the state. So David, thanks for hosting us. The current language is counties of the 5th and 6th class would be exempted from the prohibition on retail incentives. But there's been a lot of back and forth over whether counties of the 3rd and 4th class and the municipalities therein would also be exempted. As of now, it's just counties of the 5th and 6th class and the municipalities therein.
And then one last question. Would the incentive restriction bill apply to existing community development, or existing CRAs and RDA project areas, or just apply to cities which are already restricted by the 1082 provision?
Sure, yep, thank you. That has been a point of contention all fall, and Representative Schultz has said he doesn't want to affect any existing contracts or any existing deals. The way he was trying to address that was with a delayed effective date from May until July. Nevertheless, the delayed effective date may not affect existing contracts per se, but it certainly could have an impact on bonding and other effects. Yep, perfect. And then, did I see a hand over here?
Kathleen Alder from Providence, mayor-elect. When you talk about affordable housing, is that flexible? Or is there a set affordable housing definition, because it's changing daily?
Sure. Yep, and it would be tied back to the state definition of moderate income housing, which is based on the area median income. But it does vary depending where you are in the state.
That teed up my question quite well. Does it say in this bill if it's 80% AMI, if it's 60%? There's different thresholds, right?
Right.
30, 60, 80. Is it specific?
No, what it says currently is 50% in accordance with the local moderate income housing plan. So your moderate income housing plan is supposed to target moderate income housing at 30, 50, and 80.
Right, and we all have requirements that we
Right,
meet,
right.
30, 50, and 80.
Yeah, so I
to some
actually think
degree.
the way it's drafted there is to provide flexibility. The tricky part is the provision above, which is that 50% threshold.
Okay, thank you.
So over there. As Liam is taking out the mic, well, I guess the mic's already there, then I'll wrap it on this.
Yeah, Steve Mumford with Eagle Mountain City. Just wondering about, I know you mentioned this last time, Cameron, about placemaking. Can you describe that a little more and what would fit that definition? Is that like Main Street development or redevelopment, or is it broader than that?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So that was a major point of consternation, Justin, is that a good word for it? In our meeting last week, we actually brought forward a couple of different definitions of placemaking. I don't see either one of them in the current version of the bill. So instead, it calls out Main Street redevelopment and more specific things rather than the general policy around placemaking, which we had been pushing for. Jennifer in the back.
I know it's changed in the past couple weeks, but would this apply to the Inland Port jurisdictional area and MIDA, Point of the Mountain? How does that work?
As of now, the draft includes both of them as well as Point of the Mountain. So Inland Port, MIDA, Point of the Mountain are all spelled out as of now in this draft.
So that, I mean, just from a strategy perspective, that might be interesting to highlight for them, because to our knowledge, I don't know that housing is allowed in the jurisdictional area of the Inland Port, period. So, and they might not, I don't know, they might not have engaged
Right.
with those.
So that would mean they would not be able to do
Anything.
retail incentives in the Inland Port, which is defined right now as anything that collects or remits sales tax. And I'm
Okay.
going to go out on a hunch and say there's likely going to be something in the Inland Port that collects and remits sales tax
Right.
that the Inland Port may want to incentivize. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair
A
assumption.
fair assumption. Okay. I've got the inland port scars right here, so that's why I felt okay about jumping to that conclusion. Yeah. Okay, Carson, online. As Liam takes this up, our plan with this draft is to go through it. So this is primarily for league board members who are on the call. We're going to go through it and highlight the compare and contrast of what's in here versus what we discussed at the last board meeting. We had Ben Hart, the Deputy Director of the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, speak to the league board for 70 minutes and take some pretty tough questions from league board members. So we went into the deliberation later that week and said, here's everything we heard from the league board, and some of which is included in here, some of which is not. So we'll be prepared on Wednesday to set that up. We had not sent the board packet out until we got this. So league board members, watch for your packet this afternoon that'll have this, and then we'll have our write-up ready by Wednesday. That will not be in the board packet.
All right, this question is from Lanice Davenport. Can you please describe, or can you further describe the difference between project infrastructure and system infrastructure?
Sure. So it really ties back to the Impact Fees Act. So the project infrastructure, so the language they use right now really does just say as defined in the Impact Fees Act. So if it's on your capital facilities plan and is defined as system infrastructure, that would be an exception to this rule. But if it's something that's project specific, it would not be included here unless it meets one of those other exceptions around demolition or environmental cleanup. Okay. I think I may have ruined the holidays here for folks, certainly for us for the next couple of days, but that's okay. Any other questions or comments that people want to bring up now?
And I know you're aware of this because you talked about it, but you know I think the 50% is frankly unattainable. I would challenge the state to show us anywhere in the state where we have a development that meets that threshold. I just don't. The split just usually, as far as area, it doesn't come out like that in my experience. But the point I really wanted to get to is this one-size-fits-all solution of 50% across the board, ignoring the fact that we have developing cities that need this tool in order to be able to attract. We recently had a Costco come in. Like, it would not have happened. We weren't competing with other cities. We were just helping them get across that finish line because we're just not quite there as far as population is concerned. And and I know there's other cities in our same situation along the west side of the Wasatch Front that this is a tool that allows them to bring in those businesses that support their city and supports the growth that all these cities are seeing. They keep saying they want more housing. Well, people don't want to move out where they're going to have to drive 30 miles to get to a Costco. They want to move out where a Costco already exists, right? So I think that there needs to be some attention paid to the fact that not all cities are in the same situation. There may be some sort of threshold of how much sales tax you're bringing in triggers you not being able to do this, within your city. But I think that we're ignoring the fact that not every city in the state is the same. They're carving out the 5th and 6th class counties, but we have cities that are very similar to cities in those counties that are in 3rd and 1st class counties. So I think we need to realize that cities are in different places.
Right. Yep, fair point.
Just to that really quickly, we hear you, and we realize that. It has been said, as we've brought so many of these examples forward and said, there's all this collateral damage, and there was a response that said it's not collateral damage, it's just damage. It's what it is. But we really are trying to make that point. I'll be honest, I think there's about a 0% chance that we'll see a change that says if you collect a certain amount of tax revenue that you're going to be exempt for or enabled to do this. I don't think they're even, that's not on the radar. We can find out, we can propose it and bring it forward, but I don't think that they'll probably add that back in. I just wanted to reemphasize what Cam said. Please give us any additional feedback you have by tomorrow. My goal personally, representing all of you on this vote, is that when we meet as a league board, that we can reach the point where we have come together with something that we all feel good enough about, that as we continue in these final negotiations, that we can tune this and come together. If we end up having to vote no, it's going to happen anyway, and it might not be as generous as it is now. To be quite honest, it won't be. So we can either work with this and keep trying to fine tune it and reach the point where the league and the legislature can come together on this, or they're going to do it anyway. And we won't end up as well. So just being super candid, that's the reality of what we're up against. So please continue to give us your feedback, and know we will keep working to make this the best we can. And I want to thank the staff too, because they've worked tirelessly. There are so many exceptions. We bring all of your examples to the table every time. Like, if you've shared them at all, or even if you haven't, we're just aware of them, we've brought them to the table. And that is why there are several exceptions that have now been made, because this was, as I've said before, a one-sentence draft blanket legislation, no retail tax incentives, period. Done. That's it. And it's taken a lot of work to get to this point. So we'll keep doing the best we can, but let us know if you have additional thoughts. And please just know that we'll keep working. If you have thoughts you want to send to your league board representative, that's great, but we're going to really do what we can to fine tune this to the point that we can come together, because a no vote actually won't benefit us, won't be good for us. If that's how it ends up being, then we'll vote no, and we'll just go to battle and deal with it. But we'll fare better if we can come together on this.
Dan, realistically, I'm expecting on Wednesday, I don't want to put words in the mouths of board members, but I'm expecting a nuanced vote on Wednesday because there's so many moving parts. Let's do one more, so Dwayne, and then we'll keep moving on.
So I'd also just suggest we include the fourth class counties.
Oh, sorry, Ty. No, I said Dwayne, but this is me not having my glasses, but yeah, go ahead.
That's all right, just fourth class county. So I'm just speaking from Morgan's situation. We're the only city in the county. I don't know who we're in competition with.
Mountain Green?
No, nobody can compete. They're not a city. They're not an entity, right?
Yeah.
And so everything we do is based on availability of developed infrastructure. It has, and best use of the space available.
Right.
And we can't force people to sell their property before they want to, regardless of the price. So our dynamics are a little different. But for us, there's a negative impact on transportation. So if we can't incentivize retail or jobs or whatever those mixed classifications of retail business equal, then everybody has to commute from wherever we're at, to the Wasatch Front. So it's just another Wasatch Front problem, or a solution to a Wasatch Front problem in my mind for the rest of the state.
And I'm not speaking to that part. I think you make a perfect point there, and I love the fact that, yeah, when you bring up Morgan's not really competing with anyone else in the county, that's a really good point. The one thing I do want to bring up, Cam said this isn't a great Christmas present necessarily, but I think the fact that we have a draft is a great Christmas present. One of the things that's been happening for months now is really the league has been the one at the table negotiating without other people there, without all the other interest groups. I mean, this includes counties, Board of Education, higher education. There are a lot of other groups that are going to have an interest in this, and the fact that there is now a bill drafted means we're no longer alone talking about this. So I think there is going to be a lot more discussion that comes up, and we've got to give Cam a ton of credit. He's really been carrying so much of the water on this one. But we do have other stakeholders who are going to give input now. So we're not alone. We're not the only ones giving that. So I do think that is going to change the conversation as we go through and make votes in the next few weeks.
Yeah, amen to that. And one other piece I'll add that's important for you to know is that Senator Vickers is going to be the floor sponsor in the Senate of this bill. So Representative Schultz, the House Majority Leader, is the sponsor in the House. The floor sponsor will be Senator Vickers. Senator Vickers attended our negotiating meeting last week, and referenced that he had heard from his city about the impact of these proposals on his city, and the city had given him feedback that then he brought to the meeting. So we had met with Senator Vickers, but that conversation between his home city and him made a difference in those deliberations. So Justin's right, you're going to see a lot more stakeholders. It's why I say I expect Wednesday's vote to be nuanced for us. And, January 11th is a big checkpoint, but that's all it is a big checkpoint. We'll see what happens over the next few weeks. So.
Hey, Cam, can we do one more? I had skipped somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to be real quick, I've worked with a lot of, and still work with a lot of redevelopment agencies, or wherever you want to call them these days, around the state. And I wanted to echo that one size doesn't fit all comment is really valid. And that's one of the things I've worked on, all the rewrites since '93 of the RDA law, including the one we did in 2017. And one thing we've tried to do is not have a one size fits all.
Right.
And to do that's a big mistake, because it's just, I like the fact they're carving out a couple of the smaller counties, because it's really difficult to do economic development in those counties. But it needs to also recognize that there's a lot of disparity even in the same county between different locations and what they need. And I know the league's worked hard on this, and I appreciate the hard work you've done on this, but it seems a little bit ironic that we're going after brick and mortar retail at a time when they're already in trouble, and frankly, in this country. But seems to be a strange time to do it, but I understand that we have to deal with things that are brought to the table. So
Right.
Thank you.
Well, and Craig, that actually sets up nicely for the rest of the changes coming in the economic development strategy in the state. We've referenced this before. It now has a bill. It came through interim in November, and this is the modifications to the state economic development strategy and tax increment financing. So this, in large part, is the justification for the retail incentives conversation, which is to narrow how we spend tax dollars to incentivize economic development. Okay, so from a state level, this is the bill that the interim committee endorsed unanimously, and that the UEOC will consider in January as well. In fact, the UEOC has already endorsed the concept of this, but now it's actually been drafted. So you would have, instead of right now under the status quo, the state can target really any industry. Now it'll be narrowed down to just a handful of industries that actually have to get pre-approved by the UEOC before the state can provide an incentive. And then there's criteria that any business has to meet in order to qualify for criteria. I've listed a handful of them. It's a list of 15 or so that a company would have to meet to qualify for the state ed TIF. On the local side, I've listed status quo and then the proposed change. So the status quo is GOEO creates an economic development zone, which then triggers the requirement on local governments to participate and provide an incentive. The proposed change is that cities can now create those economic development zones so long as there's a long-term plan that includes transportation infrastructure, workforce development, and housing. Those terms are undefined, but if you wanted as a city to create an economic development zone, which then can qualify for those state economic development incentives, this is the criteria that you would have to meet. And then I've put in orange SB 34 plus, because this has been our concept to say, okay, as part of the housing piece to qualify for those state incentives would be the compliance with SB 34 and SB 34 plus. So this has come through the interim committee. It'll be before the UEOC in January as well. Any questions about this before I pivot to SB 34 plus? Carson, anybody online? Okay. Yep, that's perfect. Okay, going once, going twice, sold. Okay, SB 34 plus, we've talked about this in the last two LPCs. I preface it always with the survey results that you provided us as our team was working on potential changes to SB 34. And really the key distinction was incentives versus requirements, that league members, really regardless of size and regardless of geography, were open to more incentives, but were opposed almost universally to additional requirements or quote-unquote penalties like withholding B and C funds from cities that aren't compliant with SB 34. So based on your feedback, you can see we've highlighted in red what those new incentives would be. We tightened the language in the menu. That language all came to us from planners who have been trying to implement SB 34 over the last few years. So it's all local government driven. And this is what's being discussed at the Commission on Housing Affordability right now as we speak in concept form. We're still waiting for a draft so that you can officially consider it and take a vote. On the incentives consequences piece, the first piece is if there's a local match part 2. The League Board sent a letter to legislative leadership in the governor's office requesting local match part 2. The governor's budget came out last week and had $100 million for local match part 2. The second piece is the economic development zones, which I just referenced. And then third piece would be TIF, but making some modifications to that language to make it function a little better. Then another key ask within SB 34 has been additional money for technical assistance to help implement SB 34. The governor's budget also contemplates several $1 million for local governments to receive on the technical assistance side. At this point, we have fought off recommendations coming from the Property Rights Coalition and others that violate the LPC survey results and our principles around the B&C fund, and even one that said cities would not be able to use CRAs, period, if you were not compliant with SB 34 plus. So we had a land use task force meeting a week and a half ago where we were frankly fighting over these issues. And as of last week, when we met with the co-chairs of the Commission on Housing Affordability, we were not expecting any of these items to be in their bill. But again, they're presenting the concepts right now. We've got league staff, right, Carson, who's on the chalk call right now since I'm still standing up here. Okay, perfect. So stay tuned. The CHA will meet on January 7th, so there will be a draft between now and then, which we will circulate. LPC is not scheduled to meet again until the first week of the legislative session. I had a question. Yeah, go ahead, Tani. Here comes the mic.
Really quick question. Do we know how many cities are not in compliance with this right now?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Tani. And if you go back to the first year, if there had been a hard deadline for compliance, then 74 of the 82 cities would have met the deadline. The remaining 8 were stragglers that all eventually complied, but they complied several months down the line. So if you just use that as an example, then you would say roughly 90% of cities were in compliance year 1. And as we've met with planners from various sizes of cities, they're the ones who've given us the feedback of, we need to change the report so it says this. We want to be able to demonstrate that in West Jordan City, we've done X, Y, and Z, and essentially get public credit for the work you're doing on the planning side, which the report right now doesn't really contemplate. And then, I didn't put it on the slide, but there's also the piece that we proposed based on the survey feedback and caucus discussions at the league conference, that if a city's going above and beyond the call of duty, that they would get additional prioritization. So if that ends up in the bill, I actually think that's really good for local governments, because now you take that 74 out of 82 and say, okay, even within these 74, we're going to give priority to these state dollars to the cities that are going above and beyond the call of duty. But it's not a state mandate or state penalty if you don't. So that's, as of last year, everyone was in compliance. December 1st was, what day is today? A week and a half ago. So I don't know what the current compliance rate is for this year.
Just a real quick comment. I love seeing number 5 on this list from the ULCT approach. I'm skeptical that this has moved the needle at all on housing affordability, other than just something that the state likes to talk about. I think that the goal is obviously something different, but I like that we're trying to show or get some information on the market response, so that when, if we're all doing everything they say and the market's not moving, then obviously they're pulling on the wrong lever and they need to start looking in another direction rather than putting it all on the cities to solve their problem.
That's a great point. The one thing I'll push back on is that since SB 34 passed initially, we have seen in each subsequent year record amounts of new housing production. But is it, there we go, yeah, the affordable, if yeah, the data geek in me says, okay, the new supply is going like this, but you're not seeing affordability and costs go down. And that's a very fair point. And that right now, the way SB 34 is drafted and the report is structured doesn't help us get to that nexus.
Hi. I'm Francis Lilly from Mill Creek. As the person who's written this report twice, I have some concerns about the data we're asked to use and the reliability of that data. I rely heavily on the census data, and there's some pretty big margins of errors. And we're a city of 60,000 people, so I suspect that smaller cities have even bigger margins of errors. And I think that it's a good report insofar as it is, but it takes a lot of effort to kind of put it together. And I'm not convinced the data that we're giving you is entirely accurate. I hesitate with how that report, how we've been asked to kind of prepare this report over the past couple of years. And so, to an extent that we can kind of advocate for, a better kind of agreed upon baseline or data set that we can all work from. And that might require, some significant work from the Ken Gardner Policy Institute or something to kind of give us that information. I think we might have we might get better outcomes, at least on the data side.
Yeah, Francis, amen and amen, because the frustration you feel is shared by cities across the state and by your counterparts who've had to fill out the report. I actually had the somewhat uncomfortable opportunity to present to the CHA about the Commission on Housing Affordability about the data from those moderate income housing reports, and basically had to say the same thing you just said, that the data, in part because of the data the origin of the data, it doesn't tell a complete or accurate picture. And before you can even start talking about other policy levers, you've got to get that foundation right. Now, when Justin and I met with the Speaker and Representative Schultz on this issue a few weeks ago, they basically said the same thing. Like, they wanted to take the first step to get the most accurate data possible and build off of SB 34. And again, we're following up with their staff later this week. Okay. Carson, anybody else online? Okay. Is there anything happening at CHA I need to hop on right now? Oh, perfect. All right. Then you guys have me for a little longer. Yeah, all right. Perfect. Okay. Next on the agenda is Land Use Task Force, right? I don't have an agenda in front of me, but just to... No, slides follow the agenda. Okay, perfect. Perfect. I'm going to give a quick update on Land Use Task Force. And I swear I saw Gary Crane here a second ago, who's going to be my backup plan. And then I've got Lynn Pace and a few other people who are involved in Land Use Task Force. Give you an update of what's happening there on both the policy and the technical piece. Okay? Clint Drake's here. There are others who've been involved here. Ryan Luce also. I'm looking around, but I don't see anybody else. So as a reminder, Land Use Task Force meets 1 to 2 times a month from May until, frankly, through the session even, but through December. You have the Property Rights Coalition, home builders, developers, and the like, and then the League and the UAC Local Government Coalition. The League does most of the heavy lifting there. And it consists of attorneys and planners and League staff. Then this year, the Land Use Task Force roster really expanded to include folks from Wasatch Front Regional Council, Department of Workforce Services, as well as the co-chairs of the Commission on Housing Affordability. So this year in Land Use Task Force, I'd say we spent probably half the time on policy issues, such as SB 34+, and half the time on technical issues, whereas in a normal year, Ryan, I'm looking at you, I'd say it's probably 95% technical stuff, right? So that split's been interesting to navigate. Back in the spring, the League board identified 20+ policy items in the affordability space and in the growth space. They identified 20+ items as well. Those were all in the policy space. Then you have the technical issues that arise that we debate. CHA's meeting today. Okay, so we wanted to just give you a quick update on the main issues because on Wednesday afternoon, the Land Use Task Force will meet again. That's the final scheduled meeting of the calendar year. Though I anticipate we'll meet again in January, and we're getting to, I'm hoping we're getting to a point where we'll have consensus on bills to either proceed or not proceed. So one issue has been subdivision vesting. We had bill language last year that we negotiated. It was consensus language that then after the session resulted in some questions, and so we've been trying to address those questions. At this point, I think we listed a proposal, a counter proposal, and a counter to the counter proposal. I think we may have left out a couple of counters there too, because there's been a lot going back and forth over the last few weeks. This is the 10-year vesting standard that was in that compromise bill last year. Second issue that has consumed a lot of time over the last few months has been in the space of development standards. The Property Rights Coalition made a proposal around having some consistent standards on development standards in state code. Also, they were concerned about the noticing around changes in development standards. And so we've been going back and forth, back and forth. At this point, when we meet with them again later this week, our focus is going to be on potential improvements to the process, mirroring what happens really with impact fees and the changes to impact fees and the timing related there and the notice provisions there, as opposed to any sort of statewide definitions around development standards. We've met with some folks in the leadership of the City Engineers Association to do a deeper dive on this concept of industry standards, and we met with the COLA group, the Code Officials Legislative Authority, or legislative, whatever it is. But we met with them as well. Those are your building inspectors and others who are in this space to talk through this concept. But at this point, our focus is on the noticing piece when there are changes to development standards. There are a couple other items that I'll reference here, both related to impact fees. So House Bill 82 last year, which created the preemption around internal accessory dwelling units, was silent about impact fees. There are multiple legislators who want to proceed with language that says you cannot have impact fees for any type of accessory dwelling unit, internal or external. And so there's been a lot of back and forth around what the scope of impact fees should be. And this council member gets to your point on, are we actually addressing affordability? And is an impact fee a burden to the establishment of ADUs? If it is, what are the benefits that come to it of paying into the impact fee system, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of back and forth there. Politically speaking, there are a lot of legislators who wanted to have the language around impact fees for internal ADUs in the bill last year. There was actually a companion bill last year that would have had internal ADU impact fees in the bill. That just didn't pass. 82 passed without that language, but again, expecting it to come back this year. We've tried to distinguish between internal ADUs, which was the intent of House Bill 82, and external ADUs in our negotiations in this space. There's also been some discussion around impact fees related to transportation and multimodal transportation, other types of transportation. We'll see if we can get to consensus there. And then the last thing to bring up is there's been a lot of back and forth in the annexation space around who has standing to file a protest around annexation. So at this point, there are three different pieces of the PRC proposal. We've been working through all three of those pieces. One has caused a little bit of concern and heartburn, and we'll be negotiating those this coming Wednesday afternoon. So that's the quick high-level overview, but for purposes of our negotiating team, which consists of several city attorneys on behalf of the league and several league staffers, we just wanted to make sure you were aware that these are the issues being deliberated on and see if there are any questions or thoughts that people wanted to bring up before we have that final scheduled negotiating meeting on Wednesday afternoon. I have officially wowed the audience, I think, Justin. Okay. If there's anything that was on that rapid fire list that I went through that somebody does want to talk about, grab a league staffer today, send us a message again Wednesday afternoon. Ryan and Gary and Lynn and Mark Stratford from Ogden and Sean from St. George and others are going to be in the negotiating meeting with the Property Rights Coalition with league staff. So we wanted to highlight those issues, and if you had any questions or concerns, you could bring them back up. So that, Mayor Silvestrini, I will turn it back to you for the rest of the meeting. I realize we're running a little late, but hopefully people can stick around for a few more minutes.
Yeah,
It looks
so-
like the chaw just started, so I'm going to do two things at once.
All right, so since we are running a little bit late, we're going to skip number 5 and have Justin come back up and talk about this, and Molly will give you a chance to do that later. Is that? I think that a lot of us have heard about it anyway, and we'll see what comes out of the governor's budget proposal in the legislature.
But Molly did do some great work on this, so please, if you haven't, go read Friday Facts. There's great, we'll do it really fast just to show you all the slides, so, you know, I feel like it wasn't for nothing. All right, Roger, we'll have you come up and do a couple quick updates on justice courts and opioids.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to do this, flip the order. On opioids, thank you to all the cities who have made their effort to register for the settlement, who've taken whatever action in their cities to get some sort of official approval. I had heard from a number of you. All I can say is, you know, this is an exercise in good citizenship more than it's an exercise in anything else, because we'll hopefully get up to the thresholds that Utah's will be part of this settlement. One thing I wanted to let you know, you'll be getting a notice out from me in the next day or two. I was informed by the Attorney General's office there is one step that we need to do. It doesn't require any new formal action, but we do need to file online that you're officially part of the settlement, I was told. So you know what this is really being done. It's going to a federal district court judge who's going to look and see whether there's enough participation from the states and their political subdivisions across the country for this to be accepted. That's what this basically comes down to. Anyway, I really do appreciate everybody's efforts. This is one of the weirder things I've been involved in state government. On justice courts, very simply, there is no pending legislation coming from the Judicial Council's task force this year on justice courts. So that's the short answer to that question. It's been about a 2-year study. It was prompted not because there was criticism of justice courts, but to look at the issue of appeals, whether you want to keep de novo or whether you want to keep the current system. If you eliminate de novos, that changes the structure of the courts. That means they have to become courts of record, which means their appointments are from the governor, not from the current methodology. There are other recommendations that were made. We'll have more time to talk about this, but I just want to let you know there is nothing official coming out of this task force for this session on that.
Jeez, Roger got applause. That was...
That doesn't mean won't be something from somewhere else.
So what we just learned is we need more reports that say nothing is going to happen on that this year, and everyone will be really excited. Carson, I don't know if you want to come do a short-term rentals. While you're walking up, I can do a quick update. So the land and water bill that was presented a couple of LPCs ago, it's been presented several places. One of the big outstanding questions is, will we have the counties also look at their general plans to look at what it looks like to integrate land use and water planning there? We're meeting with the counties this Friday, and we'll start that discussion, but that is continuing down the road. And then I'll just give a quick update. Also, having some meetings on fireworks this Friday. So for those of you who have been volunteering and helping out on those small work groups, I will be reaching out to you again to set up some meetings. I know there's not a lot of time, but we'll get some input on a few of those things shortly. So Carson, I'll have you cover short-term rentals. Jump in. Skip that one. We not give you a slide? Oh well, you just talk about it.
I don't need a slide. So short-term rentals, I've mentioned a couple times that the league has a working group trying to wrap our arms around this bigger policy question. Short-term rentals a few years ago, just as a quick reminder, House Bill 253 from 2017 prohibited municipalities from using the site listing as the sole piece of evidence for code enforcement or criminal violation for advertising a short-term rental or for a zoning prosecution. So we've been kind of looking at that and whether that's still playing out. I think what we've seen is there's been a massive proliferation in short-term rentals over the past few years. It's not just individuals renting out their house on the weekend if they go out of town. We're seeing a lot more property management companies stepping in and investment companies starting to step in and buy up housing, and that's becoming short-term rentals. Obviously, this is a really complicated subject that involves property rights. It involves neighboring property rights. It involves housing affordability. We partnered with the Gardner Policy Institute earlier this year, and we've seen about a 20% uptick in short-term rentals in the past 2 years. That's been really heavily impacting resort community housing stock. We've brought this research. We still haven't got past the draft, but we've brought the draft research to a couple key stakeholders, the working group. A few weeks ago, I felt pretty confident that we had legislators who were really interested in pursuing the subject. I think that confidence has waned a little bit. So I'd say, as we discussed in our last short-term rental working group meeting, we're sort of taking a step back, reassessing the political climate, and trying to determine whether it's this year to try to proactively address and claw back some authority, or whether it's setting the stage for next year for a bigger policy discussion. I don't know that we have enough intel right now to proceed either way, but that's sort of the lay of the land. So I get to be the bearer of bad news today, but yeah, that's the long and short of it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll provide you a broader update.
Yeah, that's great. The one thing I will add on short-term rentals from Carson, so he's not the only one who has to bear bad news, is we have talked to Representative Waldrop. He is interested in looking at short-term rentals. It's just a question of whether or not that's something that really gets looked at this year. He's leaning more toward looking at more during the interim and then looking at that next year. Strategically, the one thing we don't want to do is go after something this year and lose and then try to come back at it again next year, because that never works really well. So that is something that we'll be working through in the next few weeks. I do want to talk upcoming events, Mayor, if that's all right. We've jumped to that one. I'm sure everybody is aware of this, but it's always fun to remind everybody that the legislative session is looming. The legislative session starts at the end of that slide on Tuesday, January 18th. As a reminder, it does start on a Tuesday now, and it ends on Friday, March 4th. So it does end on Friday instead of Thursday, like it did a couple of years ago. We will be having LPCs during the legislative session, and this is the list of them. We sent them out in an email. To make it really simple, that first week of the legislative session, it will be on Local Officials Day at the Salt Palace. Every other week, it will be at noon. At the state capitol, we will also have a virtual option available. You're probably asking, which room will it be in the Capitol? And we're going to hold off telling you that because with COVID, with a few other things, the scheduling at the Capitol is not as definite as it used to be. The response we got is, you guys should be good unless you're not. And then they'll let us know. So a very solid yes-ish from the Capitol on scheduling, but we'll obviously put out more information. But please plan on that. LPCs will basically be every week at noon during the session, and then we will have that first one on that Wednesday. So get ready for that. Those will move fast and furious, and we'll have plenty to talk about. And with that, Mayor, I will turn it back to you to finish us off.
Yeah, these are just announcements. You guys can read them. I want to spend my time just thanking those elected officials that are leaving office for their service to our communities across the state. And there is quite a bit of turnover this year, but we really thank those of you who've served, and wish you the very best in your future endeavors. And we welcome all the newly electeds to their positions, and hope that as a parting message, maybe those who are outgoing can recommend the benefits of the league and participation in our events to the newcomers, so that we continue to have a vibrant outfit here, which we do. So thanks. I think that's it. Yeah, is anybody that's leaving here that could stand up? Don't see anybody. Oh, there we go. Hey, Mayor. Mayor Katie Witt. Anyway, thanks a lot, and happy holidays, the rest of them, and Happy New Year. We'll see you next year. What? We don't have an LPC schedule. There's a possibility we'll schedule one in early January, depending how all this things work. Okay, Cameron just said we don't have an LPC scheduled for early January. We might schedule one depending on how things happen. So, okay. Look for a motion to adjourn. All in favor? We're out of here. Thank you.